Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. So welcome to our data brief release event for recognizing issues of food insecurity and hunger relief programs in the state of Rhode Island, presented by the Rhode Island Public Health Association. I am Patty Rissica, and I'm the chair of the advocacy committee for the Rhode Island Public Health Association and have been with this organization for quite some time. We are an affiliate of the American Public Health Association, and so I get the happy position of being able to really talk about both state level policies and to consider public health at the state level, as well as federal level policies, and consider how our state is affected, and occasionally how those two rub up against each other, which is always interesting. So thank you all for coming. We are going to have 3 panelists this morning, but our third panelist is held up at a different event where she's waiting for the governor to arrive to recognize the Teacher of the Year, which is a great event, but you gotta wait for the governor, so who knows? But she'll be here shortly. My background also, aside from being with the Public Health Association, is I'm a professor at the Brown School of Public Health. And prior to that, I was trained as a dietitian and am still a registered dietitian. So this topic in particular is very near and dear to my heart. Also through work with my church in Narragansett, we have a community food market, and I'm acutely aware, based on the work of the food market, of how these issues affect real people in our community and real families. So I was really happy to have not one but several students actually approach me this year about this topic and ask about addressing this topic. So it's kind of a strange convergence of several students are actually going to be working on food insecurity on campus, which is one issue that doesn't get a lot of attention, but also food insecurity among athletes and in less well-served populations. So I'm glad you've had the opportunity, I hope, to get a copy of our 2 data briefs. And I want to recognize the student, Katie Arna, who helped to write these 2 data briefs, but let me say she's home in Colorado because we ended up having to push this a little bit later than we had originally expected. But our data briefs are created based on the relationship the Rhode Island Public Health Association has with the General Assembly. And years ago, now I'm feeling really old, but I mean really a while ago, 2006, we had some conversation with some of the General Assembly members to talk about how can we be helpful? How can we in the Public Health Association help you to create policies that really better reflect the reality of data? And in public health, we're all about data and evidence-based policy. So we started creating these data briefs back then, a little bit back then, and the point of them is certainly to inform the public, but it's also to inform the General Assembly members, many of whom really have no background in health at all. And so we're happy to provide them with a snapshot, and that's why they're simple 2-pagers of the data on different health topics. And I'm happy to say, I was counting up this morning as I was looking at the data briefs and getting my materials together, that these are the 19th and 20th data briefs that we have produced for the General Assembly and for the state of Rhode Island. So this morning, what we're going to do is talk a little bit more about the issue of hunger and food insecurity in the state of Rhode Island. And we are very happy to have a speaker this morning who is incredibly knowledgeable on this topic. Kathleen Gorman is the director of the Feinstein Center for Hunger-Free America and is a professor at the University of Rhode Island. So I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Gorman to talk to us a little bit about this important issue.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you, Patty, for asking me to speak. And thank you for doing this work. It's very exciting to see these briefs being put out by the Public Health Association of Rhode Island and dealing with topics that are near and dear to my heart. I was really excited to have an opportunity to look at them and to just think about the issues that are being addressed and what our role as students or professionals or advocates or educators, many of us have multiple roles that we can think about, service providers as well. We can think about how we can help our communities and the state to make sure that those who don't have enough food to eat are, those needs are addressed. So I have just a couple of slides that I put together. Some of you may have already seen these, but that's okay. Just to kind of start what I hope will be a conversation for all of us to partake in. And let me see.
Just the page down.
There it is. I got it. Okay. There's lots of keys here. All right, so I thought we should just start out, and the briefs really cover most of the information that I think is essential, and so what I'm going to do is build a little bit on that information that's already there. So when we talk about food security, I think it's just important to think about what we're talking about, and that it's enough food for people at all times to have an active and healthy life. And as I'm sure all of you know, what makes an active and healthy life is different for every person. And so food security is important when we think about this larger goal, because we're talking about respect for people's dietary needs, their preferences, their health needs, their activity needs, their cultural needs, their religious needs. And so it's a very broad scope when we think about what people need. There's not one definition of what makes a person food secure or not. In other words, there's not a package that we can say, if you eat this, this is your food security. So that's important to keep in mind when we're trying to serve so many different populations. And as the briefs demonstrate, there are lots of different populations at risk. I think the brief really focuses in on children and our seniors, and within those, our families and lots of other individuals as well. So that's the setting that I wanted to start out with. And then I think it's important, just when we talk about food security, one of the things I was struck by is all the different numbers that we talk about, and I use numbers all the time, you know, this percentage and this number and these thousands and these millions and those. And so just to give us a grounding in what we're talking about, when we actually measure food security, we're asking these basic 10 questions to members of households and families, and we're asking them how often, if they've ever experienced this, or how often they've experienced it. And it starts out, the least severe consideration, I guess I would say, is the number one, where it says, we worried about whether our food would run out before we got money to buy more. And you know, lots of us have had that experience from time to time in our lives. Fortunately, not in my current life do I have that experience, but I have in the past, and when I was younger, you know, you really wonder, are you going to make it to the end of the month kind of thing. But as you go down this list, you realize that things are more and more severe. So you get to questions about cutting size of meals, or going without a meal, or missing a meal, or actually getting to a point where you may have gone a whole day without a meal, without eating. And there's also some frequency, how often this happens. It's asked over the course of a whole year. So in order to determine food insecurity, people have to respond affirmatively to more than 3 of those questions. And so if people who may, like I said, one of those top questions you may have actually said at some point in your life, oh yeah, sure, that's happened to me. Well, just saying yes once to one question does not classify you as food insecure. So you have to have at least 3 of those questions answered affirmatively, with always or sometimes or often or sometimes to fall into that category of food insecure. And then within food insecure, we also distinguish between those who are food insecure And it used to be called With and Without Hunger. Now it's called Low and Very Low Food Security. But nonetheless, the more severe forms of food security, you have to answer affirmatively to 6 or more of those 10 questions. So this kind of is, again, the list of questions abbreviated over on the left-hand side. And what you see is kind of what I was saying. Those black bars at the top that are very, very small, those are people who actually said yes to one of those top 3 questions, but were not classified as food insecure. Just people who said, oh yeah, that's happened to me from time to time. The navy blue, or the very dark blue bar, are those people who are food insecure or low food security. And so you see that almost all of them answer affirmatively to the first few questions about worrying about food, your food running out, not affording balanced meals. But then more and more of them are also talking about, yes, sometimes I've had to cut the size of a meal, or skip a meal, or ate less than I felt I should because I didn't have enough resources. And again, most of these questions go back to because I didn't have enough money to buy more. So it's not just because I was running late and couldn't get to the grocery store or something like that. And then those who are very low food secure, those who answer 6 or more times to these questions, that they're very high levels of food insecurity, they're answering yes to almost 100% of the first 6 or 7 questions, 6 questions, I guess. And then affirmatively, again, more and more to those questions that I think demonstrate real severe lack of food. Hungry but did not eat, lost weight, didn't eat for a whole day, and didn't eat for a whole day over the course of several months. That doesn't mean every day for a course of several months, but it means sporadically over multiple months in a year, these households, members of the households are getting to the point where they're not having enough to eat. So this kind of demonstrates, hopefully, who we're talking about when we're talking about food insecurity. And to me, it's a really difficult situation. These are folks who are really, really struggling, and they're responding about people in their households and recurring situations that happen to them. In Rhode Island, as I'm sure you learned in the brief, in the United States right now, in the data for which we have most recent data, which is 2016, which refers to 2015, about 13% of households, and it's done at the household level, are food insecure. And Rhode Island is a little bit lower than that number, so it's about 12% of households in Rhode Island are food insecure. That's about 1 out of every 7 or 8 households in Rhode Island have people living in them where they struggle to make ends meet on a regular basis and not have enough money for food. And those very low food security households are about a third, so they're about more than a third, actually, about 5% of all of those households are those that are responding affirmatively to many of those questions, to more than 6 of those questions. So we're talking about, and I have numbers over there. We don't have good household data for Rhode Island because Rhode Island's so small. So these are really, it says estimate, EST means estimate, and it is really an estimate. But if you think about it, it's about 50,000 households, or roughly 125, 135 individuals in Rhode Island who are food insecure, maybe even more, depending on household size and how you get those numbers. But so we're talking, if you look at the Rhode Island Community Food Bank, I think they talk about 133,000. Sorry. And if you look at the food security or the SNAP numbers and the people that are on SNAP, you're talking about even higher levels. So we know that we have a very significant percentage of people who are struggling to make ends meet, who don't have enough food to eat, and who are experiencing some level of food insecurity, feeling like they don't have enough resources to purchase food. And again, it's always important to remember that these numbers do not distribute equally across all populations. And so those families and households at most risk are those with children, single mother-headed households, and our racial and ethnic minority households, Black and Hispanics. So we see 1 out of 5, 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4, all of those households doing even worse than what we would say the national average. And then there's the elderly, roughly 9% of the elderly which I had a brief interchange with Patty about this, and I always feel torn. The elderly, that's roughly 1 out of every 10 households with senior citizens struggling to make ends meet, struggling to get food. It seems really, really wrong that we would have a society where people who've lived their whole lives and worked their whole lives now can't even afford to eat. On the other hand, it's always really interesting to me to point out and to see these numbers because they're lower than the national averages. And it's the only demographic on this chart that is lower than what you would expect just based on distribution. So it's 9.2 rather than 12.7. So at some level, that's a good news thing. And one of the things we know is that the reason that our senior citizens are doing a little bit better, not good, but a little bit better than the national average, is because of Social Security. And when you hear that, you should say, oh, I guess we need to make sure that we protect Social Security, because that's, again, one of those things that we're concerned about. And if, in fact, Social Security were to be cut or modified, we would expect to see these household numbers for seniors increase probably dramatically in line with some of the other high-risk groups. So it's not to say they're not a high-risk group by any stretch of the imagination. This is just a very rough kind of model to get us thinking about why and what the causes and consequences of food insecurity are. And I think it's really important that food insecurity doesn't exist in isolation. We need to think about it in the context of poverty. I listed just a few of the variables that are emblematic of poverty: maternal education, unemployment, family stress, low income, low quality schools, lack of opportunities. All of those things are going to predict and make adverse outcomes for children and families. And when I talk about adverse outcomes, I'm talking about health, mental health, behavior, achievement, as well as growth. But also there's this pathway through those variables that predicts to food insecurity, and that will then translate into less access to food, poor dietary quality, insufficient quantity, and again have a contributing effect on those outcomes. So there's both the direct effects of poverty as well as the direct and mediated effects of food insecurity on children's health and development. There's a lot of literature on the effects of food insecurity on development, and I would just summarize a couple here, bullets of many, many articles that have been established that show and demonstrate that in different ways food insecurity affects children, their health, their mental health, their cognitive, their academic, and their psychosocial development. And all of those things have both immediate consequences for children as well as long-term consequences for their future development and productivity. And I also just wanted to reiterate this is really about mothers, and it tends to be about mothers because mothers are typically the individuals who are feeding children, and so they're the most often studied, but they're also the ones most in charge of what happens in households around food. So we know that mothers in households that are struggling and that are food insecure are extremely resourceful, and that they are using many, many strategies to make sure that they can get food for their kids and do the best that they can. And I just put this in there because I think we often just think of these kids in isolation, and they're living in families and they're living in households where parents and typically mothers are doing a whole lot of really important things and to make ends meet and to make sure that children have what they need against many odds and challenges. I'm not going to go through this, but this is just a list of all the different reasons that contribute to why households don't have enough resources to purchase food, everything from jobs in the economy, to transportation, to availability, to quality, and to time. I think all of those things contribute, and you could probably add other factors as well, but those are sort of the main factors as to why families struggle. And we all know that in Rhode Island right now there's a lot of challenges around many of these issues in terms of jobs and wages and employment, transportation, everything else. And so I wanted to get to the policy piece just to, and I'm sorry that Teresa's not here because I wanted to, no, I know she will be, but I wanted tell her this. The ways that we think about the way to address food insecurity tend to be 3 different levels. And Patty mentioned also sort of the federal level and then the local level. And so I want to break these down, and then I'm going to make some comments about federal and state and how they're linked in terms of things that we in Rhode Island need to be thinking about. So at the federal government level, we have all of these federal programs, and there are many, many more than the ones I've listed, but these are the primary ones that we think about, both in terms of the briefs, but also in terms of the scope and direct impact on families who are experiencing food insecurity. So we have SNAP and WIC and the school meals programs, and then there's the summer food program that's gearing up right now, so it's kind of on everyone's radar. The CACFP, which is the Child and Adult Care Food Program, which helps both children in child care centers and seniors in adult daycare centers, and Meals on Wheels, which again was addressed and we're going to talk more about in a minute. On the flip side, there's the charitable network, which tends to be the Emergency Food Network that you read about, that is managed in Rhode Island under the guise of the Rhode Island Community Food Bank, and then sort of informal networks of family and friends that people utilize. And then people also, most of low-income people do have income. They work, they just work for low wages and don't have enough money to sustain themselves and their families, but so they also have individual incomes that they contribute. If you think about in the brief that pie chart that is really illustrative of how people's resources come together to feed themselves. That's some work done by the food bank has thought about how that works, and they calculated the total number of families that need food, and then how many meals might come from all these different places. And one of the goals of this brief and of some of this work is to say there's still a big gap in terms of what people aren't getting to eat, so that people are going without. But I think it's also interesting to use that graph to think about most of the food that folks are getting, probably about 65% of it, is coming from government assistance programs. And only a small portion of that, roughly 10%, I think, is coming from the charitable model. And so when we think about strategies, and individual income, again, is also a small percent, about 20 to 25%. I think, we would all agree that if we could give everyone a high-paying job, we could kind of close up shop or reduce our efforts, and life would be better. Not entirely, because there are always going to be a lot of populations who are still going to need help, but things would be much, much better if we could increase that individual income. But since that, I think, lies outside of the realm and scope of all of us in this room, or at least way beyond what I can talk about or challenge or do, I think we have to think about government assistance versus charity, and and that's not one versus the other, but how together we can support those programs and make sure that they're doing everything that they can and that they're supported. And when government assistance is such a huge bundle of that effort, I think we really need to pay attention to those programs. And so now I just have 2 policy slides. So oftentimes SNAP, which is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or formerly known as food stamps, is not a target of a lot of discussion in state governments. And the reason for that is because it's fully federally funded. All of the benefits that families get come from the federal budget, come from federal government. And in fact, the federal government pays half of the administrative costs to manage that program. So it brings a lot of money into the state. And that's, so the most recent numbers that I have, which are probably from 2015, that's like $300 million in SNAP benefits come into Rhode Island and are spent by Rhode Islanders in local grocery stores in our economy. So it's a phenomenal amount of money, and it's a huge economic generator. But it still doesn't get a lot of attention because these are monies that come in, okay? So what I want to make you aware of, if you're not already, is that the new budget that's being proposed, and President Trump has just proposed a budget, but the goals in his budget are very, very similar to the goals of the budget that is being written right now in the House under Paul Ryan, Speaker. So whether it's Trump's budget or Ryan's budget or somebody's budget, these are things that are being proposed. And what's important for Rhode Island is that what's being proposed is that SNAP will no longer be an entirely federal program. It will have a state mandated cost associated with it. And were that budget that's been proposed to pass, that would be in the next fiscal year, $68 million needed out of the Rhode Island budget to maintain SNAP at the level that it's funded right this minute. Now, $68 million is a lot of money, and I'm sure that the General Assembly would tell us that they don't have that money, but they would have to come up with the money. It's not going to be an option if this proposal as structured goes through. The $475 million would be over 10 years. These are estimates by the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Okay, so we're talking about a significant cost to states now for the first time ever that they would have to fund the SNAP program. And they would have to fund it. They couldn't just not offer SNAP. They would have to fund it. One of the cost-saving measures for states would be for states to lower benefits or to cut people off the program. So to save money, what might happen is that the states would then decide, that's the second bullet, well, we'll just give people less money. Or we'll just say certain people don't qualify anymore. And so we just looked at the numbers of people who are in need, and what this would be is more people would be in need because fewer people would be able to get access to these benefits. There are also proposals that want to eliminate the minimum benefit. A lot of people actually get only $16 a month in benefits. So that's not a lot of money. It's still better than $0. So $16 every month adds up, and you can spend it in different ways. Many of the people who get $16 are seniors. If they eliminate the minimum benefit, that will predominantly affect seniors and people with disabilities. So those folks would lose even that minimal benefit. There's also some technical things called categorical eligibility and asset tests. And if they eliminate those, I could go on and on about what that really means, but what it would do is it would decrease the number of people eligible for the program. So it would again technically make people ineligible for SNAP and kick them off. And then it would restrict time limit waivers for ABODs, which is a fancy word for able-bodied adults without dependents. It's our population of individuals between the ages of about 20 and 50 who are single and not caring for children, who can only get SNAP for 3 months out of every 36 months. Right now, there are waivers allowed in areas where there aren't jobs. So if you live such a state like Rhode Island, we have a statewide waiver right now because unemployment rates were so high, jobs were so limited, that to say to people, you can only get SNAP if you work, but we have no job for you to work, was actually considered not a very good policy and unfair. What the federal government is trying to do right now is to get rid of those waivers and tell people they have to have jobs, even if jobs aren't available. So these are things we have to be concerned about because these are now things that are going to impact directly on Rhode Islanders, both in terms of food insecurity, but also in terms of our state budget. So I think it's becoming more and more imperative that we engage at that level of, okay, now we got to do something about this. In addition, there's child and elderly senior nutrition programs and the school meals. It's kind of in the wrong order, but sorry. She just missed my important speech. No. So, welcome, Teresa. So, the second piece are the child nutrition programs and the senior nutrition programs. That's what that's supposed to say. Child nutrition reauthorization is really important. It affects a lot of what's happening in Rhode Island. And right now, it's just kind of hanging out there and nobody's doing anything about it. So the federal government is trying to figure out what is going to happen. But it's something we need to pay attention to because it will impact many of the programs that affect our kids in Rhode Island. We've seen already some attempts to relax the nutrition guidelines. Rhode Island has done a phenomenal job on having good nutrition guidelines for their schools, children. And there's a federal movement to relax those guidelines so that kids can have less healthy food, because nobody should tell our kids to eat healthy. There's also something that I think everyone should pay attention to, which has gotten a lot of press in the last few weeks around lunch shaming, and it is happening in all of our schools in Rhode Island as well. So kids who don't have enough money or whose budgets are running out in the schools are being singled out, called out, labeled, named for not having paid their lunch money, and therefore either refuse to get food, given a bread and cheese sandwich when other kids are getting a real meal, and otherwise being singled out. And so I think as a society, we have to really pay attention to what's happening, because this is really, really awful. I think many people, I used to say most, now I'm not so sure anymore, but many people would agree that there are ways to help kids get food, and that if the parents forgot to send the money in or can't pay or whatever, that's something that should be worked out between the school and the parent. But children should not be refused meals or made fun of or labeled or denied food because their parents forgot to send in the money for the food. In the budget, we also see that there's decreased funding for after-school and summer programs. That's in the president's budget and also will be in the Ryan budget, and that is going to directly impact all of the meals programs, because if kids aren't in these programs, they won't get that. We've seen dramatic and targeted cuts at Meals on Wheels, which is just incomprehensible as to why that was singled out as such a big target population. Kind of hard to understand why it even happened, but certainly Meals on Wheels is on the chopping block. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention is the community eligibility program, which may in fact also be on the chopping block, but it's an important program that lets all schools that have a high percentage of low-income children have meals for free in their schools, and it reduces a lot of paperwork for the schools. And I just wanted to point out that in Rhode Island, only fewer than 10% of the eligible Rhode Island schools, so the schools that are eligible for CEP, that means they have high percentages of low-income kids, less than 10% of our schools participate in CEP. And it's really problematic, especially since, and I'll just say this, we are the third worst in the nation. There are only 2 states that have worse participation rates in CEP than Rhode Island. It's kind of hard to figure out why we're not taking advantage of this, but I would say at this point, if it's on the chopping block, maybe now we should wait and monitor that a little bit, but it is a program that many, many kids could be fed for free. Schools could be participating in an easier way, but they're not. So I believe that's the end.
A wonderful meeting, wonderful presentation. Unfortunately, not a wonderful situation with hunger in Rhode Island. I'm going to just say a couple of words, but I would invite our 3 panelists, please, to come up to the panel table while I switch over slides. I want to just make 2 comments before we move on. And that is to talk about one of the reasons why I focused, in addition to focusing on food insecurity, I focused on the food relief programs, and in particular, the federally funded programs of Meals on Wheels and school lunches, was because wearing my hat as an advocate with the American Public Health Association, I had the opportunity to talk with the staff of our congressional delegates, our national congressional delegates. And in particular, they're all really supportive of this issue and really supportive of maintaining funding, if not growing funding and growing participation in these very necessary programs. So that's a great thing. And so it's a happy job that I get to go and meet with them and thank them for their support, but also ask, how can we be helpful? You know, what can we do to support you in your work that seems to be, these days, a bit of an uphill battle in maintaining these programs. And in particular, Senator Whitehouse's staff was very interested in more information about Meals on Wheels and also more information about school lunch. So that was one of the reasons why we put together the second brief. With that said, let me also say I have been in touch with and invited several folks from the Department of Education who work with the school lunch program, the school breakfast program, and they were unfortunately not able to be here today. But one of the very interesting points that was made is, you know, the school lunch program is not a hunger program. And they were a bit, you know, not happy with me framing it that way, and I'm hoping that we've reframed in the briefs to say it a little bit better. But really the school lunch program, the school breakfast program, that was not the target. That's not the reason why we have those programs. Of course, they're to feed children, and they're to make them better able to be educated and better in a better position to be educated. But they're not necessarily meant for the purposes of feeding hungry kids. And unfortunately, circumstances have changed quite a bit since school lunch came around to really, that we as a society depend on those programs to feed hungry kids. And so they have become almost backing into the role of being a hunger relief program. But that was really not the intention and not necessarily how the Department of Education looks at the program. So it's an interesting situation where we're really putting together this patchwork, right, of different programs and different benefits to try to take care of the most vulnerable in our population, but really the population as a whole. So I'm thrilled that we have a panel. So our panel certainly includes Dr. Gorman, who has already spoken to us, but also I want to introduce Heather Amaral, who is the Executive Director of Meals on Wheels, Rhode Island, and thrilled to have you here to talk about Meals on Wheels. And then also Teresa Tanzi, who is the representative of District 34 and representative to the General Assembly, and can talk a little bit about policy. So if I could just ask the three of you, so Dr. Gorman, I want to still start with you, even though you have done a lovely presentation, and ask each of our panelists to describe their role and their own position, as well as maybe for our two panelists who haven't had a chance to talk to us yet, to talk a little bit also about their perspective on the issue.
Okay.
Is it on?
Is this on? I bet I can talk loud enough. Can you hear
I
me?
think it's on, but lightly.
It's what?
We can hear you.
Now? No.
We'll just talk loud.
All right. So I direct an anti-hunger center on the campus of the University of Rhode Island. And the main thing that we do, one of the main things that we do is we manage a contract with the state of Rhode Island to help people get assistance and get enrolled in the SNAP program. So I'm very, very familiar with SNAP and the challenges of people facing that. I also, as a professor of psychology, do research on the effects of malnutrition on children's cognitive and social development. So that's how my research and my day of work kind of come together, because I'm always looking at what happens in terms of the relationship between lack of food, poor nutrition, undernutrition, and the outcomes associated with children and their development.
As mentioned, I'm Heather Amaral, the director of the Meals on Wheels of Rhode Island. As you probably recognize, I'm not a native Rhode Islander. Prior to moving here, I ran the Meals on Wheels program in Nashville, Tennessee. So I've had some interesting experience sort of comparing two programs of fairly the same size, although it was a bigger geographical area in Tennessee, it was roughly the same population. So there are some intriguing differences between population density and some of the more diverse populations that we serve here. The biggest diversity in Nashville was one group liked their cornbread a little different than other groups. Here I've got, you know, a large Italian population, Portuguese, French, Canadian, so it's been a learning process for me as well. I won't go into a lot of details about what our program does. I think the brief did a wonderful job at that, but I'll say a few words about sort of the unique place Meals on Wheels has in this food infrastructure. We're different than some of the other places that serve this problem in a couple of ways. One, we serve only seniors. You know, that's obviously unique. To be on the program, you have to be 60 years of age or older, unless you have eligibility through one of the state programs, but that's such a small percentage. It's really, when you think Meals on Wheels, you think those folks who are 60 plus who are homebound. One of the other things that we do differently is we deliver a meal that's ready to eat. It's already prepared. It's not groceries, it's a meal. And we do that because the sort of secondary part of what we do is it's designed to keep people at home as opposed to in a nursing home or in an institution. And by delivering a prepared meal, those folks who are not able to turn ingredients into a healthy meal have something that's very easy for them to eat. That sort of touches on the whole idea of who we serve, and I kind of liked the comment that the school system had, where yes, we are a food program first, unlike them, but we have adapted this sort of secondary piece of keeping people at home. But we do not means test. So that means there is no financial eligibility for our program, which in this world is very unusual. And again, while the majority of our people, just by definition, probably do need some financial assistance with feeding themselves, again, Social Security, you know, limited income, it's not like they can go out and get a second job somewhere, you know, by definition. There is a portion of those that we serve that it's not a financial reason that they're not able. It may be physical, it may be cognitive. You know, they may have the means and the physical ability, but if they have memory issues, turning on a gas oven maybe isn't a great idea for them. We talk about being more than just a meal because yes, we're coming to your door, we're knocking on it, we're giving you a meal that's ready to eat. But we're also taking a minute or two and chatting with you. The volunteer that delivers the meal delivers to the same person over and over, so they get to know them. So they, you know, it can be little things like they roll their trash can up for them every Monday. You know, that's a pretty routine thing unless you're 87 and use a walker, that it's a life-changing thing that somebody brought that up for you. It may be that they notice that Miss Jones always comes to the door with her hair, you know, combed neatly and she's dressed for the day. And for the last 2 weeks, she's still been in her robe and maybe didn't remember the driver's name. You know, they will then call us. We can reach out to the family and try to do some you know, just let them know what we've observed so they can take it from there. Obviously, if we find something a little more dramatic, someone who's fallen, someone who's in clear distress, we're going to call 911 right then. But all of that secondary to the meal, but really getting to that underlying premise of keeping folks in their home. Another big part of what we do, and it's been touched on a little bit here and there, is we provide information to these folks. When the flood happened, gosh, I guess 6, 7 years ago now, everything from FEMA was go online and learn all about this. Our folks aren't online. They don't go online. So we actually worked with FEMA to carry that paperwork to the homes. We're a little trusted because, again, our volunteers go every week. We work with SNAP on SNAP outreach. It was a big push when they simplified the form for seniors. Again, not necessarily going online, but they have people who will, you know, work with them. So we've done some pushes there. We work with the farmer market vouchers that are provided. We help distribute those to our home delivered and our congregate folks. So that pretty seriously. I won't go on and on, I promise, but I did want to comment a little bit on the funding issues. The community development block grants that are, I'll just say, still on the chopping block and leave it non-politically there. I've never felt fortunate that we as a program don't receive those until this year. But a lot of the folks that we rely on that provide us drop-off spots out of the community do rely on those. So it will definitely have an indirect impact on our program. The Older Americans Act, which makes up about 30% of our funding, there is some reduction in that we likely will not feel, not giving you the long story, but that federal money has a algorithm applied that's based on population. Because Rhode Island is so small, we have consistently gotten that floor amount. There's a minimum that anyone can get, so that's what we get. I haven't seen anywhere where that's looking at changing. So that's what we'll call good news. The flip side of that is that amount that we get, we have not seen an increase in over a decade. The state money that we receive, we are the largest recipient of state designated grants. We received $530,000. Yay. That is the same amount we received in 2007, and we had to fight to get that reinstated. The governor reinstated that in the legislature a few years ago, and we're now a line item in the budget. So good news is that seems secure. The flip side of that is, again, that's the same money we received a decade ago. Where there is more of a question mark with the funding, I mentioned folks on the state programs. That is through Medicaid, and that definitely seems to be on the chopping block. That would definitely impact that program. Our reimbursement rate for those meals is the same it was 19 years ago. So think about what eggs cost and gas cost, wages were in 1998 to now. So our biggest challenge isn't even at this point these prospective cuts. It's really more the long-term stagnation of funding compared to rising costs. So we've made a concerted effort. Our federal and state funds used to make up almost 85% of our budget. Now they're at 45%. So they've stayed the same, and we've built up grants, foundations, private donations. One of the things we're not allowed to do is charge for the meals. So it's not like we can say, okay, Ms. Jones, give me $5 instead of $3. That's not an option for us. So we do ask for a donation. We receive, on average, about $1.50 donation for the 345,000 meals we served last year. We appreciate every dollar of that, but it's clearly not covering the full cost of the meal. So that's a long-winded way of saying we're aware of the challenges that are out there, but they're not necessarily new challenges to us. We've been working on it for a while, and we're going to continue to do so. Thank you.
Let me just pipe in and say, as an academic, as a professor type person, this information about the benefit of Meals on Wheels and about the benefit of school lunch program is not out of somebody's head. There is really good data that shows the benefit of Meals on Wheels, the benefit to the recipients, how many people have been able to stay out of a nursing home, which is far more expensive than the few dollars that it takes to provide a smile and a meal.
1 year of meals is paid for, is roughly the same cost as 1 day of hospitalization for a senior. And it's I think it's 10 days in the nursing home. So when you think about Medicaid and Medicare expenses, meals are much better value.
A much better value. So to consider cutting a program like this that is clearly a cost savings program is amazing. And there also are really good data of the benefit of the school lunch program and the school breakfast program. So we want to think about penny wise and pound foolish, in terms of some of the cuts. So anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt our introductions. Teresa Tanzi, if you could introduce yourself too.
So I am representing the Narragansett and South Kingstown, and I've been in the elected office now for which was amazingly helpful when I was named vice chair of House Finance this year, as well as chair of the subcommittee on human services. So I have the unfortunate task of trying to balance a budget of $130 acknowledged shortfall, but in reality it's closer to $175 million, from my estimate, of what we actually need to make our budget work out this year. And of course, all of the programs, that we're talking about are severely impacted by the federal budget, but also the state budget. So a little bit of background, my perspective. Okay. I don't know, maybe.
It still doesn't sound like we're here.
Oh, there's the mute button. Were we muted?
No? Okay, we'll just, we'll get to it for now. So thank you very much, and I want to give an opportunity, Kathleen, I know Teresa, because of her double scheduling, talked about some of the potential challenges and potential, definitely challenges to the state budget should some of the redistribution funding be put in place. So I'd like to ask you, Kathleen, if you could just give the brief summary of that section that you really wanted to discuss with Teresa, because I think this is a worthwhile discussion to have.
Thank you, and my apologies.
Oh, no.
I don't know if you explained, Narragansett High School, a teacher there was named Teacher of the Year, so we were not allowed to say anything, but.
Who was the teacher? Okay,
Kristen,
sorry.
I know. So, yeah, it was a very exciting day, but the governor was late, he got started very late.
Okay,
So,
no, it's fine, it's fine.
So one of the points I was making, I'll just be brief, is that typically many of the federal programs, because they're federally funded, do not draw a lot of attention from our state legislators. And specifically, I was talking about SNAP. SNAP has always brought lots of money into the state with very limited cost to the state. Administrative funds are 50%, and all of the benefits are 100% federal funding. So that's made it not an interesting piece of the pie for the state legislature. However, the new budgets that are being proposed, both in terms of the Trump budget as well as what looks like it will be coming down the pike in terms of Paul Ryan's budget, has a huge cost-sharing element. So they're proposing to take SNAP and make it partially funded by state governments. So the estimates right now from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities would be that in the first fiscal year, it would be $68 million cost to the state to run the program. So when you're doing your little finance committee and we're already in the hole, you can add $68 million of cost, and that over a 10-year period, which is what the proposal is, it's estimated right now to be roughly around $500 million. That's the state cost to run the program. Obviously, I mean, my sense is obviously we can't sustain that, and most states can't. So one of the things we want to do is get the governors, all of the governors will be here soon. There's a Governors Association meeting held in Providence coming up in June. But I mean, we need to get the states to say, no, we can't do this because we can't afford it. I know Rhode Island can't afford it. I know most states can't afford it. But this is seriously being proposed, so it's a very big concern. And in addition, many of the other things that are being proposed within those budgets would both reduce the number of people eligible by allowing states to lower the benefit amount. So you could just, instead of giving people what we currently think is a very low amount, states can now make up their own amounts to save money. So certainly if they had to pay a lot of money, they might go that route. There's also things that would kick people, technically, reduce eligibility, which I call kicking people off the program. But you know, if you create lots of eligibility guidelines that are very hard to meet, then you reduce the opportunities for people to participate without ever addressing the problem that people need to eat. So there's no workaround where people are still going to get fed. So I just wanted